Welcome to today's episode. Joining Matt on the hotline is Kelly Riddle from Kelmar Global. Kelly brings his 30-plus years of experience to the show to talk about domestic investigations. Listen in as he gives some tips and covers some mistakes investigators make when trying to do this kind of work. Kelly is a national speaker, an award-winning author, and has an endless wealth of knowledge. This episode is brought to you by CROSStrax Case Management Software. CROSStrax is case management software that is built by investigators for investigators. The robust features allow organizations to manage any size caseload. The system can be customized for all types of cases, including criminal defense, process service, domestics, backgrounds, surveillance, and more. Start your free trial today at crosstrax.co and use promo code PIP20 to receive your second month for free. Let's check in with the guys and see what they bring to the table. Here's your host, private investigator, Matt Spare.
And here we are back again with the next episode of PI Perspectives. I'm really excited today because our next guest I was able to wrangle in from the 10,000 conventions he's speaking at. He's a hot, sought-after commodity here. I had the privilege of meeting him down in St. Petersburg, and we really hit it off. And man, this is just one of those guys in the industry you want to know about and you want to be friends with. So I'm welcoming to the program Mr. Kelly Riddle. Kelly, how you doing?
Hey, Matt, I'm honored to be here, man. I'm excited and enjoyed meeting you. You're a great guy, and you've got a good following, so I'm honored to be a part of it.
Well, check is in the mail, sir. Thank you.
Happy to help, man. Happy to help.
Yeah, and really, I appreciate that, man. So you gave a presentation for NALI. After the presentation, I approached you and said, hey, I'd really like to talk to you on my program about anything, right?
That's right. Ethics and marketing, I do a little bit of everything, but I think there was ethics, and that's a big deal for our industry, as you know.
Right, definitely. I just had Brandon Fortuno. We were talking about social media ethics, and that's definitely something that we need to be aware of when we're out there doing our investigative work. I know you've been on a couple podcast programs, and you really have been speaking at many different events. So I wanted to kind of get you on board and maybe talk about something a little different, something that you don't talk about typically all the time. And we settled on domestics. So I appreciate you coming on today to talk to me about that. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your company, Kelmar Global, how you got into business and what your background is?
Yeah, I'm honored to do so. So I was a police officer for 7 years, got out of that, went to work for a worldwide PI company that no longer exists. And that's why I had to start my business. So in 1989, I needed a job. So I started this business then with a partner. My partner, 4 years later, finished his degree in marriage and family counseling, and that's what he wanted to go do. That's what he was called to do. So we, separated, and I continued to march on. Started off in Texas and with one office, and kind of just built from there. We have offices throughout the major metro areas in Texas, and we're licensed basically from coast to coast at this point. So, it's been good to me.
That's great, man. Yeah, it's inspiring to hear you talk about your story and how you got into business and really what you've done and how you've been blessed is really, really awesome. And, there are the blessings, but there's also the management on that. They have to go and actually run those companies and take care of everything too. So I've listened to a bunch of your talks on how you do marketing and how you run your business. And it's inspiring, man. It's really, really cool stuff.
I appreciate that. And, you come from the same background that I do. I know we're going to talk about this, but, my background, as far back as I can remember, has been in church. So,
right.
Guys like us, we understand where the blessings come from. And,
sure.
It's always a struggle, walking and building a business. But I don't know how anybody does it, without being grounded.
Yeah, it's funny. I listened to a podcast episode recently on Francie Kohler, and she was interviewing an investigator who happened to be Christian also. And Francie was like, well, isn't that like a conflict? Like, how are you a private investigator and a Christian? And it's like, he responded right back to her. He's like, no, it totally makes sense, right? You're looking for the truth. You're looking for answers, listen, if you're a good Christian, and I don't mean to get too religious here, but if you're a good Christian, like you're putting yourself out there in those opportunities that church folk aren't there, right? You got to be the salt and light to the world. And, one of the things you turned me on to is the Association of Christian Investigators, which is something that you put together and was important to you. So tell me a little bit about that association.
Yeah, well, as you know, and as you mentioned, I speak at a lot of conferences, and I was speaking at the National Association of Investigative Specialists down in Austin, Texas, back in the 90s. And Ralph Thomas, that founded that association, he and I were just standing around talking, and he said, what do you think is the biggest issue with our profession right now? And, back in the 90s especially, you had a lot of TV shows that, they just showed the PI as a former police officer that was most likely alcoholic, got kicked out of the force, something of that nature. And I said, really, it's just integrity and ethics. And we have a bad outlook as far as the public goes. And I said, so I feel like we need to have some grounding, something that brings us back to that. And I told him what my thoughts were about starting an association of Christian investigators. And I also said, I know 4 other investigators that are also ordained pastors. And I said, those really are the people that should start this, but no one seems to be called to do it. And so through his, kind of prodding and encouragement, I started the association.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's great. And you've actually been a part of 9 or 10 boards of different associations, right? So you definitely understand that model and what's important to have that association involved in running a business. So there was another association that caught my attention. You had put together an association of different state associations, right? This like mega association of leaders from different states. I thought that was really cool. Tell me a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so I was the president of TALI, the Texas Association of Licensed Investigators, from 2010 and through 2012. And as I was stepping down from that, I had put together a world conference, and it happened to be in San Antonio. And we had about 670-something people that attended it and had a tremendous amount of vendors, and it was just a really big success. And I was, had been talking to other leaders and found out that it's not uncommon, like in a lot of associations, where at least half of your board is, goes off and you vote on another group. And so you can lose a lot of your history. You can lose a lot of your, just your moving forward, your presence when that happens. And it's not uncommon to, get started on some project and then it just goes by the wayside. Right. So, there's a lot of education. There's a lot of people out there that's been on boards that have good ideas. And, I had started discount programs with car rentals and, Staples and all kinds of stuff. And I said, that stuff should be transferable over to other associations and we should be helping each other out.
Right.
And so that's really where this came from.
That's great, man. I think people that think outside the box like that, right? So every state association has the same problem, right? How do we keep our membership? How do we get our members to say, okay, I'll write a check once a year and be a part of this, but what am I getting out of it, right? That's always the first question. And when you have that turnover in the board, that's always a problem, right? Because you start putting deals together and next thing you know, the term is up and, the person that's coming in to be in charge might not be on the same page as the other person. And, you don't really see that too often, but it does happen every now and then. And, these state associations is like you're almost on a track, right? You start off handling a region, then they put you into a secretary/treasurer, then they put you into a VP, and then they put you into a president, and then you're chairman of the board. So the idea is if you're the president of the association, you're kind of running everything. Then afterwards, you're chairman or chairwoman of that association, that you're still having that input where deals you started hopefully can come together. But man, like in New York, it's 18 of us or 16 or 18 on that board. And we always don't see eye to eye with one another. And that's definitely a challenge on getting things accomplished. So it's great that you can put together that state association and or the association of state associations and being able to feed into that. And I know that's something that like NCISS is starting to do, really reaching out to each state and offering and seeing if they have any issues or any legislative things they need a hand with, because there are many states out there that actually don't have their own lobbyists. And I didn't know that, right? So when I heard, I was like, that's crazy, because I'm from New York. My state association, we have a lobbyist. It's like, that's what you do. You have a lobbyist to lobby for your your thing. It didn't make sense to me. I was out at an event in New Jersey, and they were talking about a DMV issue they have out there, which is a real big problem. New Jersey is about to lose all their DMV information, and they don't have a lobbyist.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they have no lobbyist, so it's like absolutely crazy.
Well, that's kind of why I started that very issue. It's called the Coalition of Association Leaders, or COLE, and part of it was the legislative aspect, because at the time ISPLA and NCISS were kind of not really venturing out and doing a lot at that moment in time. Right. And so I thought, all right, if there is a legislative fight that we need to have, all of the former leaders, with any board position, if you were on a board of any kind, you can belong to COLE. And so we have a document with our signatures on it. So if you get this document that you can present to your legislators, that's got these different associations with all these people signing it, and you're either for it or against it, that makes a presence, and it's really that's part of what it was designed for. But since that time, NCISS has kind of stepped up to the plate, and so it's not quite about as much the legislative aspect.
Yeah, they definitely have seen the writing on the wall, and the fact that everything is so electronic now and living online, and the ability to communicate is that much easier. Like, one of the things they're doing is they do like a quarterly call with all the state associations, where if you're one of a president or a VP or designated person from that association, you can participate in this conference call, which is amazing, right? It's a thought tank where thought leaders in the investigative agency or industry come and they discuss legislative issues. I think it's really, really awesome. So I know we're here today to talk about domestics, and I promise you we're getting to it. Before we do jump into that, though, tell me a little bit about the PI Institute and what that's about.
Yeah, so the PI Institute was a training mechanism that I started way back in the 90s, and we literally used to have classes once a month over the weekend, and we'd have 50 to 75 people each month. And as the way of the internet goes, people didn't want to sit in classrooms, and so it went online, and that's essentially what it is now. It's certified and approved in a lot of the different states that require continuing education. So you can go online, take our courses, get training and a certificate. And the next thing that we're in the process of doing, we're actually redoing that site, and we're fixing to come out with some marketing also, because, as you know, Matt, I've written 12 books, and so we're fixing to have a marketing package where you can get 10 books, you can get a business plan, example of a business plan, you can get an example of an operational manual, you can get one free CE course and some other stuff. So all this is going to be rolled into one package, if that's what you want to call it. So that's kind of where we're going with that next.
Yeah, that's great. I think the business plan thing is awesome, right? So when I was starting my business, I had to go, like business plan for dummies, with those in that book. And, it talks about writing, a 3-year plan, a 5-year plan, your forecasting, and everything I put down in that plan when I went to a bank to convince them to give me money to start my business, I was like completely off. And I was short, which is crazy, right? I didn't give myself enough credit as to how successful I was going to be.
Yeah, that's right, man.
But having a resource like that, I think, is very, very helpful, right? How do you talk a bank manager into lending you money, right? They all think you're Thomas Magnum, or they think it's that, seedy guy that we were talking about earlier with a retired cop that's a drunk too. How do you get somebody around that so they understand exactly what we do and the need for it, right? That was a tough sell for me, but I was lucky that I was trying to borrow money when they were just giving it away to everybody. So the stock market had not crashed, so my timing was perfect.
Oh, man. But that's great reason. That's one of the 2 reasons that most people do it. The second reason that I talk about in my marketing classes is the fact that it focuses you, and it helps you decide and outline where you're going to go with your business instead of just bouncing between the curbs.
Right. And one of the things I do personally is, like, every November I'll do like a game plan for the following year. And I have a list that I check off things. All right, I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to do this. I want to do that. And it just helps me get focused. And by the time I hit January, like I'm in full gear. I don't have to think about what I want to do. I already know. I already have it all in place. So it was interesting.
Exactly the way I am.
Right. And you had, talked about with John Hodon on his show recently, which, by the way, people should check out John's show, My Favorite Detective Stories, really great podcast. But you were talking about deciding whether or not to be an investigator or a business owner, right? And you get to that point where you have to make that decision, that I'm not going to be just the investigator anymore. Like, I really need to manage my business. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's a hard move for anybody that's a good investigator. I mean, we all get into this, this profession because we are good investigators. So to step out of that and put on, a manager's hat, business person's hat, it's difficult and it's hard for all of us. But at some point, if you're going to grow your business, you have to.
Yeah. Okay, so enough of that nonsense. We're going to dive into domestics. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk on how to do domestic work and talk about some of your experiences on how you got this work done. So sit tight, everybody. We'll be right back.
Kelmar Global is a proud sponsor of PI Perspectives. A leader in the industry, Kelmar Global has been successfully conducting all types of investigations for our clients since 1989, specializing in surveillance as well as corporate investigations, insurance fraud, and cases for law firms. Kelmar Global is licensed throughout the U.S. Contact us at kelmarglobal.com. Please reach out to Kelly and his team if you need anything covered throughout the United States.
And welcome back to PI Perspectives. This is Matt Spare. I'm your host, and we're here today with Kelly Riddle from Kelmar Global, and we're talking about domestic surveillance. So welcome back, Kelly.
Thanks, Matt. I'm enjoying being here and talking to you.
Okay, so domestics. I know I had, when I started doing my my investigative business, actually before I even started my business, when I was working for somebody and learning how to become an investigator, they had spatterings of doing domestic work, and I hated it, right? Because I would always catch the person doing something, and then they would reconcile, right? And nothing would happen. And then they'd come back like 6 months later. He's doing it again, or she's doing it again. You got to go out and do it. And I get so frustrated because I'm like, I already solved your problem. Why are you coming back to me?
That's right.
I made a decision, like, I don't want to do this kind of work, and I just don't do it. So it's not my wheelhouse. I know plenty of investigators, especially here in New York, that do it, that I always line up. So tell me a little bit about how you got into doing domestics and what's your approach to it.
Well, when I first started my business, we did 100% insurance defense work, and that is only about 20% of what we do now. Most of what we do is corporate work. But, as the world goes, you work with attorneys, and the attorneys go, look, I know you don't do domestics, but come on, do this for me. It's a real good client. So you kind of get into those. And realistically, I mean, I've had some pretty good paying domestic cases. We had one not too long ago. We billed out over $500,000.
Wow.
And we were on that case for over a year, around the clock. We had an apartment, right across from the guys and everything else. I mean, you can hit some home runs financially on those. So, but you have to deal with the emotions, and that's the downside.
Okay, so that is another problem that you run into. So you're right about doing the work and doing somebody a favor, because anytime that I'm doing that kind of work, domestic work, through my business personally, it's always a favor to somebody. So I had this situation, I think it was the last year or the year before, where we were doing a favor for somebody, and we caught this person's spouse red-handed. I mean, like it was definitive that there was something going on, right? You could not even argue it.
Wow.
And, the guy came back and he's like, well, this is my fault, right? I haven't been a good husband. And now all of a sudden you become a psychologist, and, you try and be polite and you work your way through. And next thing you know, they're calling you like once a week to just unload on you. I'm like, I'm not Sigmund Freud, dude. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm trying to run a business. Like, maybe you need counseling and help. That would be like money better spent than having me go out and do work again. So there is that, human aspect to it, right? And you feel bad for the man or woman that's going through this. But it does it get to a point where you got to knock it off and say, okay, I'm not, I don't have a degree to give you advice. Have you come across that situation?
I have. And as I mentioned earlier, my former business partner, that's why he's my former business partner, because he went out and got his PhD in marriage and family counseling. So he refers people to me and I refer people to him.
All right.
So it works out very well, and I mean, we had a lady one time that we showed her the video and she ran out of the office, and I literally had to chase her down, and as she was shutting the door, she was reaching down underneath the car seat, and she was grabbing a pistol.
Oh my God!
And she's like, I'm gonna go kill him, and call him all kinds of names and stuff. And so that's what I'm talking about. The emotions and stuff. You end up being a babysitter a lot of times.
Right. That's crazy. So all right. So let's say somebody's getting into this business, and let's say they have a knack for this. Like they really want to do this type of work. How would you solicit this type of work? What would you recommend? And how do you get into it? And how do you get the best results in doing this kind of work?
Well, really, it's one of the easier parts of our business to get into. Doing defense work where you get court appointed to help defend people, and domestics are probably the two easiest to get into. So, what you need to do is find the attorneys that are family law attorneys and just solicit them, market to them.
Right.
And, once you get into them, then you have to be fairly good at surveillance. So hopefully, if you're getting into it, you have some experience with surveillance.
Now, do you recommend running 2 or 3 person teams, or is it a one person job just to get started?
Yeah, it's, the budget's going to dictate that, as you know, but obviously 2 or 3 is always the way to go. And, but a lot of times they just can't afford it. So one, it may be all that you have, but I'm sure you've seen this too, Matt, where I've had clients call up and say, look, I know my husband's going to be at such and such bar, and I just want you to send in this gorgeous female and hit on him and see if he'll take the bait, And for me personally, we don't do that.
Entrapment,
I think that's entrapment.
Yeah,
right,
totally.
And I mean, I've had some of my friends over the years that have had that happen to them, and
sure.
when we walk out, they crumple up the number and throw it in the trash. Just because they took a number didn't just means they didn't want to hurt the person's feelings. So you got to figure out where does that go? So
I'm always under the impression, right, that there's 2 sides to every story, and then there's the truth, which lies somewhere in between the 2 sides to the story, right?
That's exactly right, man.
And I don't like judging people, right? That's not for me to do either. So I try and another reason I stay out of domestics is just not my cup of tea. But I understand the need for it. I definitely do. So what do you think are some of the mistakes that investigators make that are trying to get into this work or do this work?
Well, I think part of the problem is they're not properly. They don't have the proper equipment a lot of times, because this type of case, you may start off in a vehicle, you may follow them to a bar, they may go into a movie theater, may go into a restaurant. So you got to have a lot of different abilities as far as video goes. And they take, for instance, in San Antonio, which is where I live. San Antonio is the number 1 tourist attraction in the state of Texas, and so we have a tremendous amount of conventions here. And a lot of times they want us to watch their spouse who's here on a convention. Well, we have the Riverwalk, so you may start off on street level. You may end up down on the Riverwalk where all the bars and restaurants are. You may end up back at the hotel. So you got to be real flexible and have that ability to mingle and transfer into different environments.
Yeah, I guess you got to be ready for anything. I remember I was watching a presentation for Cali. I was out in Las Vegas, and they had brought in a woman investigator who ran a PI business in Las Vegas, and her whole thing was doing surveillance on people in hotels, right? And one of the things they had is they had dummy keys to each hotel that they just developed relationships where they were able to have these these passes that would get them essentially into the hotel. It wouldn't get them up. I think it got them on the elevator, but it wouldn't get them into a room or anything, but just something to get into the elevator. I was like, oh, that's pretty crazy. And the thing is you pick them up off the hotel, but then you don't know, or off the airport, but then you don't know what hotel they're going to. Right. So, it's like, it's a cat and mouse game. I don't know. It's very stressful for me, man. I know, man. Well, and that's the other problem, because a lot of times, again, being in a tourist location, they may not know what hotel they're staying in, so they say just pick them up at the airport. It's like picking up a piece of gum, and then it escalates. Now you need at least 4 people, right.
4 investigators, just to pick them up and get them from the airport to the hotel, because they may get in an Uber, they may get in a rental car, somebody may pick them up. I mean, all kinds, and that's just assuming that you see them coming out of the gate to begin with.
Right. Right. Yeah, we had something recently a few weeks ago with Laguardia Airport in New York City. And if you ever been to LaGuardia in New York City, if you've been there recently within the past year or so, you understand that that is hell on earth, literally, in the construction that they're doing there. It's very confusing, and it's really, really, really tough. So it's definitely a challenge.
Well, and then you have different things, as you and I have talked about. I mean, I've had cases where I have, just because you can do it in the location where you live, I've had to go to different states. I've gone to different countries. I've gone, followed one guy to 5 different islands down in the Caribbean. So, you got to be able to take your tool, your trade, and go, to a lot of different environments.
Right. That's very interesting. Sounds like a lot of frequent flyer miles.
Yeah, exactly. But these are the cases when people always want to talk to PIs, and they always want to hear your stories. And so these are the ones to me that everybody goes, man, I just can't believe it. I mean, we've had guys that have had multiple families. We've had one person that supposedly he met this lady, my client, on the internet, and they married 6 months later in Las Vegas after only seeing each other in person 2 times. Wow. And just as they were leaving, they left Las Vegas, were going to Jamaica for their honeymoon. And right before they landed, he said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to meet my other 5 wives." So
that's amazing.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Was his name Bill Paxton? Was he on Big Love?
I know, right? That's the truth.
Were they from Utah?
I know.
That's
you would
crazy.
think so.
That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Totally trying to get all the deadly sins out of the way, right?
All in one, man. It knock them out with a home run, But that one was fun for me because I got to go to different islands and I had to, meet each one of these quote wives and develop a rapport with them and get them to tell me about how they came to know their quote husband. And the strange thing about that is I also had a brokerage house in the East that this guy had scammed some money out of, so they wanted me to find him to find the money, and so both of the clients agreed that I could do a dual investigation.
Nice.
And so on the way to Jamaica, the guy was sitting there looking through all these financial records, and so my client, she didn't know what to do, man. She was in shell shock, 5 other wives. And so all she knew to do was make copies of his papers at night when he was asleep.
Wow.
And so she gave me a copy of that, which had a lot of financial data on it. And so, I scored a home run for both of those clients.
I'm sure if you kept following the guy, if you went to like another island, you probably would have found where he buries the bodies. Just like craziness.
Yeah, I know, man. Well, and what's strange about that is, if you can do this, I lost him on an island. I sat beside him and his real wife from California at dinner in Jamaica, and I was talking to him and stuff. And so I found out that he was going to be going to, I think it was Bahamas, and whichever island it was, I lost him there. So I told my client, I said, FedEx him something. I don't care. It has to be picked up. Just make sure that he has to sign for it at the location there. Right. So I staked that out. And so sure enough, he shows up and boom, I got him,
Well, that's being creative. So tell me some of the other creative things you've done on domestic surveillance.
One of my clients he'd been married for 25 years, had a son and a daughter who were like almost 24 and 22, but he had a mistress for 23 years and had a son and daughter from that arrangement as well. And so one day, the wife opens his briefcase and finds these condoms, and she's like, "Man, why does he have condoms? We got grown kids." So she hired us, and that's when I started finding out that he had another family. Well, it gets stranger because his wife was named Debbie, and his mistress was named Debbie, and from a distance they looked almost identical.
Wow.
But through this process, we found out that his mistress was born on December 26th. So every year, right after Christmas, he supposedly had to leave on business, when in actuality he had to go spend the birthday with the mistress, and out of all this, he sent one of his kids from his marriage, I think it was his son from his marriage, to the University of Texas, and he sent his daughter from the mistress relationship to the University of Texas at the same time.
Oh my goodness.
And we never could figure out if they ever met each other, but can you imagine if he had, one of the kids had brought the other one home for, the holidays and say, "Hey, meet my boyfriend," That would have been interesting.
That sounds like a terrible movie from like 2010.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Yeah, I mean that's that. But again, those are the kind of things you cannot make these things up. And we followed people from here to, you mentioned Utah. We followed one guy to Utah where he met his mistress, and and being from Texas, we're not as used to the snow as you guys are. So the things that you got to run into is they go to a ski lift, and you go, all right, now you got to follow them on ski lifts, and your cameras, they're used to being in nice warm weather, and so now they're getting all this moisture in them, and they're flashing, can't function. So you have other issues that you got to deal with when you're following people in different environments.
Right. Yeah, and sometimes you only get one chance, right? So you got to be ready for anything. That is
money shot.
Yeah,
got to get the money shot.
That is absolutely crazy. I remember I was talking to one of the members of Cali, and he was talking about domestics, and he was talking about how he had this one client that every year he would hire him, like I don't know, for the past 15 or 20 years to just do follow-up surveillance on the ex-wife. So they had some sort of agreement in their when they were splitting up that if she ever was to take up residence with somebody else, that he could stop paying the alimony payments, and it was a lot of money, right? So it was this balance of how much am I going to pay an investigator every year to do the investigations on this, to how much am I paying off? And do you know it took them 17 or 18 years to finally get the guy?
That's what I'm talking about. They can be some good paying cases.
Yeah. So he was bummed because he had finally caught the guy, and he's like, I know I'm not going to get that guaranteed income anymore. The guy, he was nice doing business with you. Thanks for everything. I don't need you anymore. You got me out of paying the alimony payments. I thought that was interesting.
But that's a very interesting case, but you also run into things, for instance, in Texas, if you can say, all right, I watched the hotel room, they, put them to bed, lights went out, or the house, and, you go back bright and early the next morning and you see, the subject and his girlfriend come out, then you can pretty much surmise that they probably spent the whole night there. But in some jurisdictions like Louisiana, you can't do that. I mean, you got to sit there and literally watch the door all night long and to be able to testify that they never left and no one entered.
Right. I guess there's that reasonable doubt, right?
Like that. Yeah. So, you just got to know your jurisdiction and the laws where you're working, I
think that's important. So I would assume with you being global, you have or being throughout the country, also that you have a list of locals that you do use when needed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, we're in most jurisdictions, but you can't be everywhere. You know how that goes. So as you know, from going to conventions and conferences and stuff, that's where you meet those people, man. That's where you figure out who are the people that you can lean on when you need them.
Right. So you keep a short list of people you have when you got to reach out. And what's crazy with these domestics is, and I have been getting a lot of these calls lately because of, I don't know if it's because of the show or it's because I've been going to a lot more conventions and conferences and meeting people, but I'm starting to get calls from New York, and it's like, oh, they're flying in 6 hours. I need them surveilled. I get those, trust me. Or you get the insurance carrier calling and say, yeah, I need somebody picked up this weekend. We finally got the okay, but we can only pay $50 an hour. And I'm like, you do realize this is New York, right? Yeah, I know. I'm like, I can't help you. Even if I had somebody, I can't help you.
New York's a totally different ball game, man. That's, I have been there and have done those things where, you start following one guy out of an office building and he, jumps in a taxi and then he goes a little ways and, he may hit the subway. And then, there's so many different things and avenues and ways for people to get around in New York City, not to mention the fact that you just got a lot of people that you got to get around,
Right. I know we had a case we worked on, I think it was last year or the year before, where there was a businessman, a very prominent businessman who, he had his wife, but he also had his girlfriend, and everybody knew this guy had his girlfriend, his kids knew, and the whole family knew about it, right? Everybody, I guess, but the wife, right? So the guy ends up dying, and he's got this huge estate, and now the woman's trying to lay claim to one of the buildings, saying, that she had this relationship with him and that she lived there, and because she lived there for so long that she's now entitled, to have proceeds from the sale of that property. And it's like,
Wow.
okay, that's a little strange, right? So what we ended up doing is we ended up finding where she really lived, and we started doing deliveries there, and we eventually got her. Here's some flowers, sign for it, please.
Yeah.
And it was enough in court to, when they went for the judge to say, it was kind of a stretch to begin with. Now it's really a stretch. I don't think I'm going to allow this to happen. So, it was interesting.
That's an interesting case. We had one very similar to that, and our client wanted us to watch his girlfriend to see if she was cheating on him, and he was married. So, like, really, you want to do this? You're a married guy, and you want to watch your girlfriend. So it's like, what's wrong with this picture?
The world has fallen, man. It really is.
Man, it's a messed up place sometimes.
Yeah, that's why people need PIs.
That's right.
We're needed, man.
Yep, we'll always have a job as long as there's temptation out there.
Yeah, it's crazy. The same thing too with my business model, right? With the personal injury, like I don't ever see myself going out of business. People are always going to have access, and there's always a need to understand how or why something happened. And you can, no matter what technology there is out there, no matter what, you're still going to need to have the ability to go out and investigate where it happened and talk to people and get it done, right? There's always going to be that human element to it. So I think all the dating sites and all this other stuff, it just adds, some spice to the formula, to the recipe, but you're still going to need to do that. Actual domestic surveillance is always going to be a part of it.
Well, it comes down to the two of the oldest, professions. You got greed, people trying to take advantage of the insurance companies or whatever, and money. I mean, money is the root of, as you know, most evils. And so when you dangle that carrot out and sex with cheating spouses and stuff, I mean, it's going to keep us in business for a long time.
Right. Yep. So, like, how do you break somebody in? Like, let's say they're coming in to work for you in-house, and you want to get them involved into domestics and learning. How would you train somebody? How'd you break them in and start them off?
Yeah, so I don't care if it's former DEA agent or who it is. For us, they have to ride along, with one of our investigators. So I've got some of my guys been with me 18, 19, 20 years, and so those are the people that we put them with, and so they go out and work some of these cases with them, and part of it is just training yourself what to look for. Like, when you're shooting video, if it's a domestic case, zero in on their ring finger, find out, are they wearing their ring? Are they, intentionally trying to ditch it? Things of that nature. Make sure that when you follow somebody to a hotel, you get the hotel marquee on it, and you follow them up to a floor. Make sure you get the room number that they go into on the video, and those kind of things. So you got to train people to not only observe, but also make sure that you get the right video, and then close in for that money, like we talked about before. And for us, the money shot could be, anything from, they lean over and kiss, they pat the other one on the rear end, they very seldom do you ever get them, where they're making out in a car. We have had those before, and one time in particular that I remember, we actually called the police because they were behind a building, an office building, and it happened to be where I'm very familiar with, where my dentist is located. So we called and reported a suspicious person. So the police come and they pull him out of the car, and the guy's trying to tuck his shirt in, the woman's trying to get her skirt back on, and
right.
So there's a lot of different ways to handle situations like that. But ultimately, to your point, you just got to train them up right, and tell them what to look for.
Right. So, I mean, one of the things I always wondered about too is how do you manage expectations? This person hiring you, they're convinced that their spouse is cheating or doing something nefarious, but we're not always getting that huge money shot or that big win, and they obviously still gotta pay for our time. So how do you approach that going in to managing the expectation of the attorney client or someone who's a direct hire?
Yeah, that's a great question, and as you know, part of that is educating our client from the very beginning. With attorneys, it's not, it's a lot easier, but with just the general public, going over what I just, mentioned is a very important thing. It's like, very seldom are we going to catch them, just butt naked with their clothes off, So I said, you need to understand that, and you need to figure out what is justification in your mind for, divorcing or whatever. I said, our job is to give you information, and it may be just where we catch them, one of them going into the other one's house, and then coming out, and that's all you get. It may be that we catch them, put these under the table, whatever. And so ultimately you put a lot of those things together and you can develop the fact that it's more than just a friendship. I mean, if they're holding hands, if they're walking arm in arm, if they, lean over and kiss each other, you have a long hug, all those things, would tell a reasonable person that it's a relationship. And at the end of the day, that's essentially what we tell the client. We will give you all the circumstantial evidence, and then it's going to be up to you to make your call on what your comfort zone is.
Right. How do folks get a hold of you if they have any questions or they want to learn more about the PI Institute or any other the projects that you're involved in?
The website is Kelmar Global, KELMAR Global.com. My toll-free number is 888-873-1714, and the PI Institute is PIinstitute.com.
Okay, great. And we'll have all that information in the show notes. So, hey, Kelly, I really appreciate your time. I know you got 10,000 things going on here. So where are you speaking at next? Where are you going next?
Yes. So next we'll be at the Intellinet conference in Las Vegas at the end of March.
Oh, my goodness. I'm going to be there.
Yeah, well, we get to hang out again. I love it, man.
Right.
Get some face-to-face time.
Right.
Looking forward to it. But,
yeah.
Hey, I appreciate it, Matt. This has been a blast, and you got a great podcast going here, and thanks for letting me be a part of it.
Oh, I appreciate that, man. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon, and we'll talk to everybody else soon. So thanks, guys, for tuning in, and we'll have the next episode, and look forward to talking to you next week. Take care. Bye.
We thank you once again for joining us this week. Can you believe that guy who introduced his new wife to his 4 other wives? You can't make this stuff up. And this has been a very special Lifetime movie event. Jeez. How about that FedEx trick to pick up a surveillance subject? Make sure you check out Kelly's PI Institute for more investigator training. Thanks again to Kelly and Kelmar Global for sponsoring the show. Also, a special thank you to our other show sponsor, CROSStrax. Don't forget the offer code PIP20 when you visit their site. Now, next week, Matt is joined by George Gerges. Matt and George sit down and discuss criminal investigations and how to break into that business and succeed. We really appreciate your support, and don't forget to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and share the episode with your friends. Have a great week, and see you next time on PI Perspectives.